Welcome to the debate. If you've ever taken a high school physics class, you might remember that almost every introductory problem seems to take place in this magical, non-existent universe.
Right, the one with a perfectly frictionless vacuum.
Exactly. It's a universe featuring no air resistance. You're asked to calculate the trajectory of a rolling ball, and, the math works out beautifully on the chalkboard.
Yeah, because you never have to account for the friction of a carpet or, the sudden chaotic interference of a bird flying into the ball's path. It's the classic spherical cow paradigm.
The spherical cow, right? It's a running joke in science for a reason. It makes the underlying formulas very clean and comforting when you're just trying to grasp the basic math. But it doesn't actually help you much if your ultimate goal is to step outside and build a real airplane that has to fly through a thunderstorm.
No, it really doesn't.
And that brings us to the topic today. Because when you step into the world of pedagogical methodology, specifically adult language acquisition, we see that exact same frictionless vacuum being actively sold to learners as reality. Today, we are examining how we teach adults to speak a new language in high-stakes social environments.
And we're drawing our focus directly from the Easy English Daily curriculum, specifically looking at a foundational restaurant ordering scenario between a customer and a server.
Right. We're looking at a tool that is heavily scripted, highly sanitized, and frankly entirely devoid of real-world friction. So here's the core of our disagreement today. Does the rote memorization of highly structured, polite phrases from the material like "I'd like" and "could we have," genuinely build functional conversational confidence?
It's a great question.
I will be arguing that the structural repetition of these targeted modular phrases provides essential cognitive scaffolding, which is the prerequisite for genuine confidence.
And I will be arguing that relying on these idealized, frictionless dialogues fails entirely to prepare learners for real-world interactions and basically just builds mechanical recall.
Okay, so to start, I think we have to look at the psychological reality of the learner. My perspective is rooted in the source material's explicit pedagogical thesis, stated right at the end of the lesson. It says, the more you practice, the more confident you'll become.
Which sounds great on paper, sure.
But I want to break down exactly how and why this works from a cognitive perspective. Because if you've ever traveled abroad and, let's say, you've tried to order a simple coffee in a bustling Parisian cafe, you know exactly what it feels like to have your brain completely lock up.
Oh, absolutely. The sheer panic of the person behind the counter staring at you, the deer in headlights look.
Exactly. When an adult learner enters a foreign restaurant, their working memory is just entirely flooded. They are navigating a new, potentially overwhelming menu. They are interpreting a completely new cultural environment, managing a massive spike in social anxiety. And on top of all that, they are trying to recall vocabulary from chapter 4 of their textbook.
It's a lot to juggle.
It is a state of massive cognitive overload. The brain literally cannot process all those variables at once. What this methodology does by providing specific modular phrases like "there are two of us" or "could we have the bill, please," is it dramatically reduces that cognitive load.
I don't disagree that cognitive load is a real barrier, but I completely disagree with how this text attempts to solve it.
Well, instead of having to generate grammar from scratch while under severe stress, the learner is equipped with what linguists call lexical chunks. These are prepackaged, safe, culturally polite tools.
Safe being the operative word there.
They guarantee transactional success. It takes the terrifying, infinite possibilities of a human conversation and narrows them down to a manageable, executable script.
Okay, you're calling it a manageable script, but I look at the specific ecology of the dialogue presented in our source material, and I see an artificially smooth reality that is honestly pedagogically dangerous.
Dangerous? How is being prepared dangerous?
If you look closely at the interaction, it relies entirely on highly accommodating, perfectly anticipated responses from the server. The customer says, "Excuse me, we're ready to order." And the server neatly replies, "Sure, what would you like?" Every single input from the learner is met with a frictionless confirming output.
Right, which helps them progress through the transaction.
But instructing learners to simply listen, repeat these phrases, and practice them aloud builds nothing more than mechanical recall. It assumes a perfectly linear interaction that rarely, if ever, exists in real life.
Wait, so are you saying we should deliberately confuse beginners? Because if we don't give them a linear interaction to start with, they won't even open their mouths.
No, I'm not saying we shouldn't confuse them. I'm saying we shouldn't lie to them about the friction. True confidence isn't the ability to recite a line in a vacuum. It's the ability to navigate the friction when the script inevitably breaks down.
Okay, I have to push back there. Because I think you are vastly underestimating the sheer pragmatic utility of formulaic politeness. Let's look closely at a specific moment in the source text.
Go ahead.
The customer sits down and the very first thing they say is, "Could we have a few minutes to look at the menu?" From a pragmatic standpoint, this is a highly sophisticated construction. It's not just a blunt, direct demand like wait.
Sure, it utilizes modal verbs.
Right, it utilizes modal verbs for politeness, which instantly grants the learner a degree of social grace in this new culture. Think of these phrases like training wheels on a bicycle.
Okay, I like that analogy.
When you are first learning to ride, the training wheels are undeniably rigid. They don't allow you to lean into tight corners. You can't navigate complex, rocky terrain with them. But what they do provide is necessary stability. They keep you upright so you can actually experience the forward momentum of the transaction without falling over and severely injuring your confidence.
Which is a lovely thought, but
But wait, let me finish the thought. Could we have a few minutes allows the learner to pause the interaction, control the pacing of the conversation, and buy themselves crucial time to process their environment. That isn't just reciting a line, that is immense functional utility.
the training wheels analogy is actually perfect, but it highlights the exact flaw in the methodology. Think about how training wheels work in the physical world. They only keep you upright if the ground beneath you is perfectly flat and predictable.
Well, sure.
Let's look at the exact matching of the script in the source material. The customer orders the vegetable pasta and asks, "Does it contain cheese?" Now look at how the server responds. "Yes, it does. Would you like it without cheese?"
Which is a fantastic, helpful response that keeps the conversation moving.
It's too helpful. It is a perfectly frictionless, perfectly anticipated exchange. The server not only answers the factual question, but proactively solves the unstated problem.
I mean, that happens in good restaurants.
Sure, sometimes. But what happens in reality? The server might say, "Yeah, it's baked into the sauce," full stop. Or the server might just stare at the customer waiting for the next instruction. Because this curriculum provides the rigid training wheels of the question, but pairs it with an artificially accommodating environment, it utterly fails to teach adaptability.
The learner isn't taught how to handle a server who doesn't immediately offer a solution. When the script breaks, the training wheels catch on a rock and the learner is thrown violently over the handlebars.
I'm struggling to see how you expect a beginner to handle that rock, though. You're looking at the server's helpfulness as a fatal flaw, but I view it as a necessary pedagogical simplification. It allows us to focus on the learner's agency.
Agency? How so?
Let's look at what happens right after the cheese question. The customer says, "Yes, please," and "Could you make it a little less spicy?" This completely undermines the idea that the script is just passive, unthinking recitation. This learner is actively modifying their order.
Yes, asking for a modification is a form of agency.
It's the ultimate form of agency for a beginner. It demonstrates that the script isn't just about passively reading a menu. It actively teaches learners how to assert their needs. That is the very definition of building confidence.
Is it though?
Yes. When a learner successfully uses that phrase, "Could you make it less spicy?" and the food arrives exactly as they wanted it, that psychological win is massive. It creates a powerful, positive feedback loop in the brain that actively encourages further language acquisition. It proves to them, I can do this. I can alter my reality using these new sounds.
Okay, but you're ignoring the mechanism of human conversation. By framing this as a successful exercise of agency, you are ignoring that communication is inherently a two-way street. Yes, "Could you make it a little less spicy?" has baseline utility as a declarative request. But look at the methodology's explicit instruction at the end of the module.
You mean the practice section?
Exactly. It says, listen, repeat these phrases, and practice them aloud. The focus is entirely 100% on the broadcasting of the request.
Because you have to know how to broadcast before you can do anything else.
But by only practicing the broadcast, the learner isn't remotely prepared for rejection or negotiation.
You're teaching them to treat human interaction like a vending machine.
A vending machine? That's a bit harsh.
Think about it. You input the correct phrase, less spicy, you press the button, and out pops the desired, perfectly tailored result. But language isn't a vending machine. What happens when the server says, "I'm sorry, the sauce is pre-mixed in the morning by the chef and we can't alter it"?
Well, logically, they would have to choose another dish.
Logically, yes. But linguistically, do they have the tools to do that? Do they have the language to express disappointment or ask for a recommendation instead? No, because rote repetition of "could you make it less spicy" leaves the learner entirely stranded the moment the answer is anything other than, "Of course, no problem."
I hear you, but
If you don't teach the language of negotiation, how to pivot, how to ask for clarification, how to graciously accept a no, you aren't building agency. You're just building a very fragile monologue.
I feel like you are expecting advanced improvisational pragmatics from a foundational methodology. We have to look at what the source material is actually trying to achieve in the brain. Which brings us to the true meaning of practice and confidence as outlined in the curriculum's conclusion.
All right, let's hear it.
The host explicitly directs the learner, keep practicing your English every day. They emphasize taking phrases like, "Can we pay by card?" and practicing them aloud repeatedly. Why do they do this? Because of the cognitive mechanism of proceduralization.
Muscle memory?
Exactly, but it's deeper than just muscle memory. In cognitive science, you start with declarative knowledge, right? Knowing that a phrase means something. You can look at a flashcard and know that "can we pay by card" is a request for payment.
Sure.
But to use it in real time, under pressure, that declarative knowledge has to physically shift in the brain to become procedural knowledge. The end of a meal in a foreign country is often the highest stress moment. You are calculating unfamiliar currency, you're trying to figure out local tipping norms, you're trying to flag down a busy server.
Oh, it's definitely stressful.
So by relentlessly practicing the structure, "Could we have the bill, please?" the methodology ensures the learner doesn't freeze. The language becomes an automatic reflex. The basal ganglia takes over. They don't have to consciously think about the grammar of modal verbs. Their mouth just produces the sound. That automaticity is what generates true internal confidence.
Okay, let me break down what actually happens in the brain when you rely solely on automaticity in a dynamic environment. Because I fundamentally challenge the equation presented in the text. Listen, repeat these phrases. The more confident you'll become.
Why?
Because this entire pedagogy is based on the illusion that conversation is just taking turns delivering monologues. It entirely neglects the hardest part of language acquisition, which is dynamic listening.
How does it neglect listening? The learner has to listen to the server to know when to deliver their proceduralized response.
Because they only have to listen for highly predictable, sanitized cues. How many people are in your party? Gets, "There are 2 of us." What would you like? Gets, "I'd like the grilled chicken." This kind of practice doesn't require active, dynamic listening. It requires basic pattern recognition.
Well, pattern recognition is a first step.
But true confidence in a language requires the ability to tolerate ambiguity, to decipher thick accents, to ask for clarification when the server speaks too quickly or uses unexpected slang. When the text promises that simply repeating these lines aloud in your bedroom will make you confident, it is actively setting the learner up for an affective filter crash.
Okay, I think we need to explain what that is for the audience, because that's a pretty heavy linguistic term.
Right, sorry. The affective filter is a concept from linguist Stephen Krashen. Think of it like a literal, invisible wall in your brain. When a learner experiences high anxiety, stress, or a sudden loss of confidence, this emotional wall shoots up and literally blocks the language processing center.
Meaning they just lock up.
Exactly. Input cannot get in and output cannot get out. You freeze. Now imagine our learner walks into a bustling, noisy restaurant. Instead of the scripted, "How many people are in your party?" the server says something completely outside the script, like, "Are you folks waiting on anyone else or just you 2 today?"
Which is a very common, colloquial way to ask the exact same question.
Extremely common. But the learner, who has only practiced their rigid lines and expects a specific cue, will panic. The affective filter slams down. They will feel like a massive failure, completely unaware that it was the methodology that failed them. By promising a frictionless world. They weren't taught to listen for context. They were taught to wait for their cue.
I see your point,
But doesn't having the script lower that affective filter initially? You can't teach a beginner to tolerate ambiguity by throwing them into the deep end of the pool and asking them to decipher complex colloquial slang immediately.
I'm not saying we should.
The scaffolding must come first. If they have automated the phrase, "there are two of us," and their brain manages to catch just the word two in the server's rapid-fire, unpredictable question, they can deploy their phrase successfully. The script acts as an anchor in that noisy, unpredictable environment. It keeps them from being swept away by the panic.
I agree that scaffolding is necessary. I really am not saying we throw them to the wolves with no vocabulary. My point is that the methodology shouldn't promise that rote repetition alone yields confidence. The text actively promises that if you just repeat these phrases, you will be confident.
Okay.
It should explicitly tell the learner, these phrases are your starting points, but the real world will be messy, people will speak over you, they won't follow the script, and that is perfectly okay. The pedagogical danger is in the false promise of the frictionless vacuum. When you expect a vending machine and you get a chaotic human being, the psychological crash is devastating.
That is a really sharp distinction. So you're saying the flaw isn't necessarily the phrases themselves, but the framing of those phrases as a complete solution rather than just a starting line.
Exactly. The vocabulary and the grammatical structures themselves are not the enemy. You absolutely need the phrase, "Does it contain cheese?" And you need to know how to ask for the bill. It's the sanitized context in which they are practiced that I take issue with. You need the phrase, but you also need the psychological preparation for what happens when the answer isn't a neat, accommodating follow-up.
Well, from my perspective, I still have to reassert that mastering a foundational script of polite, functional phrases exactly as presented in this curriculum is the most reliable, evidence-based way to build initial confidence.
Even with the false promise?
Because by actively reducing the cognitive load and proceduralizing essential requests, this methodology equips learners with the essential tools to successfully initiate daily transactions. Without those tools, the anxiety of generating grammar from scratch would paralyze them before they even walk through the restaurant doors.
And I maintain that while these phrases undeniably have a high baseline utility, the core pedagogy is flawed. Equating repetitive script reading and artificial dialogues with true confidence is a massive pedagogical misstep.
We might just have to agree to disagree on how big of a misstep it is.
Perhaps. But it leaves learners highly vulnerable to the unpredictable, messy nature of real human interaction. By relying on an ecosystem where every single request is met with an excellent choice or right this way, we are teaching learners to broadcast their needs, but we aren't teaching them how to actually converse.
I will concede, however, that the source material's total failure to model any kind of friction, like a misunderstood order, a mumbled response from the server, or an unavailable dish, does represent a missed opportunity to teach conversational resilience. But I think we both clearly acknowledge that specific lexical chunks extracted from this material, such as "there are two of us" and the highly versatile "I'd like," are undeniably practical, high-value starting points for any learner.
Absolutely. If you don't know how to say "I'd like," you aren't going to get very far in any restaurant anywhere in the world.
Which brings us right back to our opening thought about the physics classroom. If we want our learners to eventually fly the airplane, if we want them to negotiate, to pivot, to truly converse, we have to start by teaching them the basic physics in a controlled environment. The critical question we've uncovered today is simply, at what point and how honestly we introduce the wind resistance.
Exactly.
We encourage you, our listeners, to reflect on your own learning experiences. Whether you've tried to pick up a new language, learn an instrument, or master any new complex skill, consider how structured, repetitive scripts have interacted with your ability to handle spontaneous, unscripted reality. Think about that moment your training wheels came off. There's clearly much more to explore regarding how the human brain truly acquires and deploys knowledge under pressure.
Because ultimately, you can't live in the frictionless vacuum forever. Eventually, you have to step out of the classroom, walk into the restaurant, and deal with whatever is actually on the menu.
A memorable thought to leave on. Thank you for joining us for this intellectual exchange. Until next time.